Throughout the world, people go to extremes. There's amazing ingenuity and some stuff that's mind-bogglingly dangerous. Some people push the limits because they have to. Others because they choose to. In this episode of The World's Most Extreme.
The development of aviation is perhaps the most world-changing invention there ever was.
Since the Wright brothers' first flight, humans have been obsessed with taking to the skies in ever more creative ways, breaking records and pushing technology to its limits.
Aircraft are all about freedom. The freedom to move through space, the ability to soar into the sky, to leave the concerns of our mundane life here on planet Earth.
These are the world's 10 most extreme. Wingsuit flying is one of the most dangerous sports on Earth. Despite a mounting death toll, its popularity has soared.
Wingsuits use material to connect your body into a little wing, and that means that you can glide through the air. But humans weren't designed for flight. We're far too small for our weight to glide at a safe speed. Typical wingsuit might have you zooming through the air at about 50 miles an hour, which is good fun, but it's far too quick to land safely. To touch down safely in a parachute, you want to be doing more like 10 miles an hour.
Few take this unnatural activity further than Scotty Bob, an ex-military daredevil who tests wingsuits. Scotty Bob now specialises in proximity flying, soaring as close as possible to the mountainside.
Yes, it is incredibly dangerous, but it's like if you're driving a car down the highway and there's a barrier right next to you. You're going 80 miles an hour, but you don't hit it, like, unless you do something stupid.
Yeah, just like driving a car. But there's no car, no road, no controls, and the threat of instant death just a few feet away. This isn't enough for Scotty. He likes a real challenge. Scotty's launch point will be a peak in the mountainous west coast of Norway.
We're here at one of the most iconic wingsuit jumps in the world. I kind of grew up and learned wingsuit just specifically to fly here. This is the dream world of wingsuiting. It's the playground and everybody wants to come play at. Kind of one of the very first places that the world really saw what a wingsuit could do.
Mount Bispen is known for steep cliffs and sheer vertical drops, and is notoriously risky.
All right, we're gonna be headed right up there. There's a cloud up there right now, but there's also a cliff. We'll be going from up there at the Bispen, flying all the way down there. Probably be, maximum 10 feet away. Around there.
That is 10 feet away from sheer rock. The start for Scotty and two friends will be 1,462 meters high. The most dangerous point will be only feet from a wall along a road. And they'll have to reckon with the mountain's fickle weather.
Having a good grasp of mountain weather is important to being a good wingsuit pilot. In a valley like this, it creates its own weather. Obviously later in the afternoon, it's going to get valley wind, valley flow. And landing our parachute, it might be okay if you're flying the wingsuit, but landing a parachute can get really kind of hazardous.
And mountains are notorious for their unpredictable weather and wind conditions. You could have downdrafts, updrafts, all kinds of wind conditions that you can't necessarily see when you launch off, but even the slightest tailwind when you're flying down a valley could be deadly.
We're looking for good, calm, still air.
With the weather changing from minute to minute, Scotty hopes a jump may still be possible, so heads to the meeting point with his friends.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I was gonna pull over, take a look at the weather, but it doesn't really look great.
Even Scotty sometimes says no. Perhaps tomorrow.
If the clouds break for whatever reason, It's not supposed. It's supposed to be like patchy low clouds, so like I might be able to sneak one in.
Yeah.
The next day brings clear blue skies.
Pretty much perfect. Here it is.
Scotty and his friends hike up the mountain. 90 minutes up for a few seconds of flying. Now it's time for Scotty to stare the 1,500-meter drop in the face.
Yep, good one, buddy. 3, 2, 1, and let's go.
Scotty's flying at almost 100 miles an hour when he pulls the parachute. It's taken less than 50 seconds to complete the drop.
That's the redemption jump, man.
Only highly trained experts can attempt wingsuit flying. But as dangerous as it is, Scotty's already thinking about the next jump.
Back it up and do it again.
From flying in nature to being inspired by nature. What happens when you cross one of these with one of those? This is the Beluga XL. It's almost 19 meters high, the equivalent of a 3-story building. It's around 63 meters long, or more than twice the length of a blue whale, and has a payload of 51 tons, enough to carry 34 of the beluga whales it's named after. But the amazing thing is, it's a plane that's been re-engineered to carry parts of other planes inside it. The fleet of 5 Beluga XLs are being built in Toulouse.
The airplane industry has unique challenges when it comes to designing, building, and then transporting airplanes and the parts that become airplanes. They need giant structures to build them, giant hangars to store them, and to move some of their parts in the air, they need giant planes to move them.
Airbus manufactures components in facilities across the world. They bring them to Toulouse for final assembly, using planes to speed things up. It's a clever idea, but Airbus weren't the first to have adapted a passenger plane to carry other aircraft.
NASA in the US used to have a modified 747 to transport the space shuttle. And they would literally mount the space shuttle on top of this plane, and you would see it fly and think like, that's impossible. It's so heavy. But once you strip out everything from the inside of the plane, it doesn't weigh that much. So inside that giant fuselage is mostly air.
Airbus couldn't piggyback the components. They're too fragile. It was inside or bust. And lo, the Beluga was born. The airline has a fleet of 5 standard-sized Belugas operating at near capacity, flying 5 times a day, 6 days a week. They're huge, but they can still only carry one A350 wing at a time. The new Beluga XL can carry 2. Building your own Beluga XL is easy. It's like a cut and shut, but on a much, much bigger scale. First, join the front of an A330-200 to the back of an A330-300. You don't need the top half though, so you can bin that. Instead, you need to build a huge custom freight hold on top. That's going to mess with the balance of the plane though, so you'll need to make the tail section a lot bigger to compensate, like putting a big spoiler on a hot hatch. Finally, give it a nice paint job to cover the joins, and you're good to go. Except, because this isn't a back alley cut and shut, a new plane needs over 600 hours of flight testing to prove it's safe. And once you have your airworthiness certificate, you can load it up. But exactly how do you get two 32-metre long, 6-metre wide wings into a plane?
Open up this thing and you just see a cavernous hold that can carry so much stuff, so much space. It's a work of engineering genius.
The 140 square metre, 3-ton cargo door hinges upwards to enable cargo to roll on, roll off. When you're moving a wing belonging to an aircraft worth nearly $300 million, you tend to do it very carefully.
It's really weird watching them unload the fronts of planes out of this thing because it looks like a giant mummy plane giving birth.
For the record, planes can't actually give birth. In 2015, a mysterious object appeared in the skies across the world. Crowds gathered to gaze at it, captivated. Some thought it was an extraterrestrial visitor. Others claimed it was a solar-powered vehicle. But it was night, and there wasn't any sun. In Abu Dhabi, Japan, Hawaii, and Abu Dhabi again. This is Solar Impulse 2, the first solar-powered aircraft to fly around the globe, staying airborne day and night. Like the Wright brothers' plane built in 1903, it's a material-covered frame. But this frame is made from carbon fibre, a modern material which is both strong and light. It has a wingspan of 72 metres, almost as wide as an A380. And it's powered only by the 17,000 solar cells on its wings.
It's extremely difficult to get enough power out of these solar cells to power an aircraft. And then you have the additional challenge of what do you do at night? You need batteries to store enough electricity so you can keep flying through the dark hours when there is no power.
SuperTanker 3-2 left.
The Solar Impulse team had to find exactly the right balance of weight versus energy storage. Too many batteries and the plane would be too heavy. Too few, and it would run out of power during the night. Solar Impulse 2 relied on a team of 20 experts working around the clock to plot its flight path, to ensure it could capture enough sunlight. On the 9th of March 2015, Solar Impulse 2 set off from Abu Dhabi on the first leg of its round-the-world journey. To save weight, the Solar Impulse has no undercarriage on its fast wings. This means that on takeoff and landing, ground crew need to support the wings and tail so it doesn't tip over. The team wanted to prove the worth of clean technologies in an industry that has a poor record.
Flying is probably the single worst thing that any one of us does for the environment, and that's because it emits a huge amount of gases that cause climate change. Aircraft use a huge amount of fuel, and to put it into perspective, the amount of fuel burnt is about the same as if every passenger had driven their own car to the destination.
Building a solar-powered plane is an important first step in moving the aviation industry towards a low-emission future. But with room for only a single passenger who also needs to be the pilot, it's going to be a while till we see a commercially viable solar aircraft. Conditions on board are challenging for the two pilots who take it in turns flying the plane in 17 legs. The longest leg of the journey and the ultimate red-eye was a record-breaking 5-day and 5-night flight between Nagoya in Japan and Hawaii. Whilst the aircraft carries snacks, beverages and offers various in-flight exercise routines, the pilot can only sleep for a maximum of 20 minutes at a time every 2 hours. After 23 days in the air, around 43,000 kilometers covered, it completed its circumnavigation of the world on the 26th of July 2016, when it landed back in Abu Dhabi. Over the course of 16 months, 11,000 kilowatt-hours of energy were produced by Solar Impulse 2, the same amount used by a family home in 1 year.
If you can create a plane that can suck enough juice from the sun into its solar cells to stay afloat indefinitely, that changes everything. No longer is fuel a problem, no longer is distance for traveling a problem. These planes could, in theory, go anywhere at any time, as long as it's not cloudy.
Breaking with convention can lead to breakthroughs, but sometimes it just breaks things. After just over a century of flight, aircraft engineers have settled on the most aerodynamic and fuel-efficient shapes. One of the most significant design innovations of the last 30 years has been winglets, which give airplanes better fuel efficiency. They don't help you land the plane, though. Computer modelling, wind tunnels, and billions of dollars in research and development have led to planes looking, well, kind of the same. Is this a Boeing or an Airbus? Who knows? But it wasn't always so. This is the X-29, a 14-metre-long, single-engined aircraft capable of flying at a supersonic speed of Mach 1.6. Only 2 were ever made, at a cost of $43 million each. And yes, it's got its wings on backwards. The most unusual design in aviation history operated out of Southern California. Built as a research aircraft and flown by the US Air Force, the X-29s proved one thing for certain. Planes with their wings on backwards are highly unstable. This is the X-29 spin chute, deployed in the event of an unrecoverable spin. The X-29 has been called the most aerodynamically unstable plane ever built. But it turns out this wasn't a bad thing. Stable aircraft designs are great for learning to fly. Point them in one direction and they'll maintain their course. Ask them to perform an evasive maneuver, and well, they can't. It turns out that an unstable plane like this acrobatic trainer can be more maneuverable than a stable one. But it's much more difficult for a human pilot to fly. The solution is fly-by-wire.
Fly-by-wire is using essentially electronic control of the rudders, the flaps, the ailerons, so you don't have a direct connection between what you're doing on the joystick and how the flaps and the ailerons move about.
In between the joystick and the flight surfaces, computers constantly intervene to help the pilot control the plane. Without fly-by-wire, most modern fighter jets would be near unflyable. The X-29 had a network of computers, making up to 40 corrections every second. Although bear in mind, that was when most computers looked a bit like this, and were 47,000 times less powerful than a smartphone. Airbus was the first plane manufacturer to fully adapt fly-by-wire in a passenger aircraft. The benefits were huge. The loss of mechanical connections meant decreased weight, so better fuel efficiency. There was more systems redundancy and greater safety when software stops a pilot from endangering the aircraft, like stalling it at low speed. The X-29's backwards-facing wings weren't a huge success, but its embryonic fly-by-wire systems set in motion a technology found in virtually every civilian and military aircraft today. Even fly-by-wire has its limits, and sometimes there is no replacement for a human. The highest mountain in the world. Everest attracts thousands of climbers every year who face a harsh and challenging environment. But what happens when disaster strikes and you're stranded at high altitude? How do you get off the mountain when it's a case of life or death? The world's highest flying helicopters operate out of Lukla, Nepal. Flying at high altitude poses a number of challenges for the pilots. Freezing temperatures, thin air, and hostile weather conditions all make rescue work highly dangerous.
Helicopters weren't designed for high altitude travel. Everything that's challenging about flying a helicopter at normal elevations becomes much more challenging.
The pilots who work with the high altitude helicopters are pushing them to their operational limits.
The higher you go, the thinner the air becomes, the less efficient the rudder system is, the less power you have on the engine.
At the top of Everest, the air is about a third as thick as it is down at sea level. And that means that you're going to have to push 3 times as much air through the rotors to get enough lift to make sure the helicopter stays in the sky.
The thin air doesn't just affect the performance of the helicopter, it also affects the performance of the pilot.
At a high enough altitude, one needs to have either a pressurized cabin or supplemental oxygen in order to avoid the effects of hypoxia, which could affect the effectiveness of the flight crews.
Weather conditions also pose a serious threat to rescue missions. Extreme weather fronts can rapidly roll in through the valleys, with visibility reduced to zero in just a few seconds.
There are other weather factors that impact on the lift of a helicopter. The weather itself, the wind speed, the amount of cloud and humidity in the atmosphere.
When pilots come in to land, the job gets even tougher.
A lot of the lift the helicopter gets, it's from moving forward through the air. But then when it comes time to land on a peak or hover or conduct a rescue at high elevations, the helicopter does have to land and take off vertically. That's extremely challenging in the thin air of the mountain peaks.
Even so, Everest mountain rescue pilots have flown countless missions, saving hundreds of lives. Inside this hangar is a giant of the sky. It's not a plane or a helicopter. It's an inflatable. In the Cardington hangar in Bedfordshire, England, this is the Airlander 10. 92 meters long, 26 meters tall, and with a volume of 38,000 cubic meters. It's the largest aircraft in the world, and it's been nicknamed the Flying Bum. But these cheeks have a surprisingly aerodynamic form.
You can do what you want with it, really. You can bob around if you want it to bob around, it can fly straight, it can do amazing things if you want it to do amazing things.
Great, but what is it for? Back in the 1920s and 30s, airships were the future of air travel, as they carried passengers across the world's oceans in stately luxury. But the spectre of disaster still haunts the airship. the Hindenburg, the colossal German airship which crashed in 1937 in New Jersey, killing 36 people. To provide lift, the Hindenburg used hydrogen, a lighter-than-air gas, but extremely flammable. The Airlander uses only helium, slightly heavier than hydrogen, but still lighter than air, and critically, non-flammable. Built by a small British team, the Airlander started life as a 45-foot-long model that was impressive enough for the US Army to commit $150 million to develop it. It was designed to be a long-endurance reconnaissance vehicle in war zones. The full-size HAV 304 was built and underwent a series of test flights before the project was abruptly cancelled. The UK design team bought the HAV 304 back from the US military for a fraction of its development price. It was renamed the Airlander 10, with possible new missions, ranging from a luxurious sightseeing platform to a cargo ship for places without ports or runways.
So what we're designing here obviously is a complete aircraft with all the systems that you'd expect on a large aircraft that you go on holiday in. But compared with Boeing and Airbus, where they've got thousands and thousands of people working on those projects, we're a small team here, around 100 people.
But what systems does the Airlander have that the airships of yesteryear didn't have?
The Airliner is a culmination of decades of knowledge about aviation. So many of the innovations that you would see in commercial airliners, even in small private aircraft, electronic cockpits, automation, flight controls that are connected to computers, the use of GPS navigation, all that's incorporated into the Airlander. So even though it may look a bit unusual on the outside, even though it's primarily a lighter-than-air vehicle, it's incorporating many of the same technologies that we see day to day.
Is it even an airship?
The Airlander is a hybrid aerospace vehicle that uses a combination of buoyancy from the helium that's in the envelope, as well as aerodynamic forces. The shape of the Airlander is such that when it's going forward, it generates lift, much like a wing.
In essence, 60% of the lift is generated by the lighter-than-air helium. The other 40% is generated by the wing shape of the envelope. 4 directional turbines drive the airship along at speeds of up to 92 miles per hour. It's environmentally friendly, efficient, and adaptable. And while there's no shortage of ideas for what it could do, it's still trying to find that one killer idea that could make Airlanders an everyday sight in our sky. Not all aircraft are quite so serene. The Huey, evacuation specialist of the Vietnam War, now running a speed dating agency for one of the planet's most at-risk animals. In KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, this Huey now spends its days airlifting endangered black rhinos.
We reckon there are about 5,500 throughout Africa. That compared to the hundreds of thousands there were 2 centuries ago. They are on the critically endangered list.
Black rhinos are the victims of serious poaching in Africa. One solution to this problem is to move the rhinos away from their attackers. But that's not the only reason to move them.
The emphasis of our project here is to get black rhino to breed faster, to try and maximize numbers.
In overpopulated areas, male rhinos compete, often aggressively, for the attention of females, with many breeding-age rhinos left without a mate. By moving them to more sparsely populated areas, more rhinos are given the opportunity to breed. Relocating rhinos involves the helicopter team working closely with conservationists in the field.
We'll go into a reserve. They will have earmarked which rhinos they want removed. And their ground teams will go and find those rhinos. And once they have found them, They will call in the darting helicopter, which is another smaller helicopter. They will dart the Rhino.
It's a dangerous process darting the Rhino. The helicopter has to continue tracking it until it loses momentum and goes down. But how do you approach it safely on the ground?
Before we hitch the Rhino up by its legs, we want to make sure it's breathing properly. If it's not sleeping very deeply, we'll give it another injection to make it sleep deeper. You can't really keep them hanging under the helicopter for more than 20 minutes to half an hour, because then they start struggling with their legs. And only once the Rhino is sleeping will they call in the airlift helicopter.
The clock is ticking until the anesthetic wears off. And they must watch that the Rhino doesn't overheat.
Now, by getting the animals into the air as quick as we can, the cooling effect of them flying, it helps to regulate their body temperature, because that's one of the side effects of the drug. They lose the ability to regulate their body temperature. So the quicker we can get them in the air, the quicker we can get the body temperature down.
Once the Rhino is asleep, it needs to be blindfolded. Its feet are strapped. A line is lowered from the Huey and the Rhino is hooked on. Communication between the ground crew and the helicopter is entirely via hand signals. And the Rhino is lifted gently into the air. Tosh makes it look easy keeping the Rhino from swinging around, but it takes many hours of practice in training sessions to develop that skill. Speeding up the footage shows the constant process of correction needed to stabilize the swinging cargo.
So as you can imagine, you don't want to have a Rhino swinging left and right like that. You do these things in training with a bucket or something you can just throw away, or sandbags.
After a 14-minute flight, the Rhino is nearing its new home.
So you want to fly the load as smoothly as possible, because as you can imagine, you don't want to end up dragging the animal on the ground and putting it down while it's going sideways. They're pretty tough, but I mean, imagine if you were at the end of it, you'd also like to be put down gently. So that kind of sums it up.
It looks like this Rhino is going to get straight up, causing a moment of panic on the ground. Once it's clear there isn't any danger, they can release the Rhino from the straps, and Tosh heads off to his next relocation.
So we're trying to do as many as we can, in the time that we have. And I think our best was about 14 in one day. To date, I've done just over 200, and the success rate, touch wood, is 100%. We haven't lost any, we haven't hurt any, and I'd like to keep it that way.
Lowering a Rhino to the ground gently takes finesse. Imagine being 25,000 feet in the air, traveling at about 350 miles an hour, and needing to align the refueling pipes. And if you think that's a challenge, now imagine you're traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, and you need to dock with another vehicle traveling just as fast. That's exactly what the SpaceX Dragon is designed to do. The International Space Station, ISS, orbits around 400 miles from the planet's surface. ISS is a permanent research facility, so astronauts are based there year-round. But astronauts can't just pop to the shops. So where do they get their supplies from? The answer is Dragon X, the fastest commercial delivery vehicle on Earth, or rather, anywhere. The Dragon made history in 2012, when it delivered cargo to the International Space Station and returned cargo to Earth safely. It was the first commercial aircraft to achieve this. But just how did it attach itself to ISS, when both are orbiting at over 17,000 miles an hour? The docking and berthing process is highly choreographed and requires extreme precision. The slightest wrong move could be disastrous.
Seconds after liftoff, the Falcon 9 will reach
Dragon gets shot up into space. As it comes close to the space station, it goes into an orbit, something called a co-elliptic orbit. It's nearer to Earth than the space station, because what you don't want is for the Dragon to crash into the space station and damage it. And then slowly over a period of time, it adjusts its height until it's about 10 meters away. They send out a robot arm with a grabber on the end of it, and that grabs hold of the Dragon.
This whole process can take up to 3 days. Once the Dragon is berthed, the astronauts can remove and load cargo ready for its return to Earth, which only leaves the rather uncomfortable task of dealing with 1,600 degrees Celsius temperatures as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. But at least they have a bigger target to aim for. On the world's most extreme, we've been to the top of mountains, to the African bush, and to outer space. And now, the Sahara. Or is it? Actually, it's the Australian outback. And a camel roundup. Not with cowboys, but these workhorses. It's one of the world's most dangerous piloting jobs. Australia's outback covers an area of nearly 2.5 million square miles, which makes wrangling on horseback a challenge. So many ranchers across the country use choppers to round up their cattle. But then came the camel problem. In the 1800s, camels were imported to Australia from India and the Middle East to carry loads. But when trucks took over, they were released. Now around 1 million of them run wild in the outback. They damage farmland and drink dry, precious water supplies. Thousands of camels have been culled, while some ranchers round them up to sell for live export or farm for meat and even milk. But in order to steer herds of feral camels towards your ranch, you need to make hairpin turns and hover at slow speeds, whilst flying meters from the ground.
You would think that flying close to the ground would be safer. I mean, if something goes wrong, you're close to the ground. But in fact, being close to the ground is the most dangerous thing for a helicopter.
Low-altitude flying, in general, in a helicopter is more dangerous because the pilot or the flight crew has to watch out for obstructions and other issues on or close to the ground.
Worse, a helicopter's engine can cut out, and this can actually be safer at higher altitudes. If a chopper's engine cuts out, the pilot can manually adjust the pitch of the blades down, reducing lift and drag. And the air being forced up through the rotor system drives the blades like a windmill. This allows the chopper to effectively glide to Earth. As it approaches land, the pilot adjusts the pitch of the blades up, increasing lift and drag to help the chopper land gently. It's known as auto-rotation. In this demonstration, the pilot has cut the engine power, but by adjusting the pitch of his blades, he can exploit auto-rotation to glide safely down. But at low altitudes and low speeds, a helicopter doesn't always have this safety net.
When a helicopter pilot is flying close to the ground, especially if there is very little or no forward airspeed, any situation that results in a loss of power could result in a situation where there's not enough altitude for the helicopter to gain enough airspeed for auto-rotation to be effective.
Which means a chopper doing this can smash to the ground at any time. And although helicopters are designed to be agile, every year pilots are killed wrangling cattle in this way. Some pilots have no choice but to fly towards danger. Wildfires are on the increase around the world. Around 1 million acres of land were burned in California alone in 2017. When a fire is this big and this fast, the firefighters' priority is to stop it from spreading. And to do that, they need this. The world's largest firefighting plane is in Colorado, USA. This is the global SuperTanker.
What's amazing about this is it's a 747. I mean, it's just one of the biggest commercial aircraft ever made, totally devoted to firefighting.
The SuperTanker is a firefighting machine for hire. Government agencies and companies contract it to drop liquid in and around fires anywhere in the world. From the outside, this looks like a standard 747, preparing for some very thirsty passengers.
This aircraft is the only firebomber 747 in the world. So it's the only one that's equipped with the tanks. It's the only one that has a drop system.
470 seats have been replaced with huge tanks that can hold around 19,000 gallons of liquid.
Behind me are 20 tanks. This is what makes up the tanks for our drop system. We have a right side and a left side. They're independent of each other. 9,600 gallons each for a total of 19,200 gallons. The last tank in the row of 5 has 2 16-inch tubes that turn and go down through the bottom of the aircraft.
The SuperTanker loads different fluids according to its mission.
If the agency we're working for wants to do direct attack where we're dropping right on the leading edge of that fire, then water's the most effective.
In the US, the favored strategy is to use a special fire retardant, a sticky chemical that creates fire breaks to help contain the fire.
When the fire reaches that line, it slows the progress down to the point that the firemen on the ground can then put the fire out. So it's really more about tactics.
Whatever the SuperTanker is carrying, it never loads up to the max. Underloading it increases the available thrust and makes it much more maneuverable. It's capable of climbing at 6,000 feet per minute, 3 times steeper than the average takeoff.
Because we're so much lighter than the max takeoff weight when we're fighting fire, it's actually very nimble. We're the only 747 that routinely flies at 70 meters over the ground. And we follow that map of the Earth and down into valleys, and we keep that 70-meter spacing, and that's basically how we drop our retardant into that fire area.
The drop helps the SuperTanker climb out of its steep dives with a 2-for-1 deal by both lowering the weight of the plane and adding an unexpected directional push.
Each of these tubes can produce up to 15,000 pounds of thrust. So when we do a full pressure 4-valve drop, it's 60,000 pounds of thrust that's going straight up. So it's almost like a 5th engine helping this aircraft perform and climb like out of trouble.
The SuperTanker works with a lead plane which marks out where it needs to drop the liquid.
We don't use GPS, we don't use any fancy technology. It's 100% visual right out of the window. So that lead plane will meet us just outside the fire and sort of guide us in. And generally we'll do 2 passes. The first pass will be what's called a show me, where that lead plane will fly around and describe the target. And he'll use things like, do you see the tree that's split in half? We look down and we see that tree and we say, oh yeah, I see that tree split in half. He'll say fly north, this direction, and then I want you to go about a half mile, and do you see this rock that looks like a bear? I want you to start at that split tree, and I want you to finish at the bear.
The 747 was once the world's largest passenger plane. Now it's the biggest firefighter in the skies, and the world's most extreme.